Today is Sunday. It's Chav Ches Adar. Tuesday is the Chodesh Nisan. Yesterday was, of course, Shabbos Varchim. And it was also Chav Zayin Adar. In Tafshin Nun Beis, but this is 25 years. It's a quarter century. It's 25 years since the Rebbe's stroke. It's like yesterday. Look at your children and you'll believe it. Look at your children and your grandchildren, you'll believe it. You look in the mirror, you don't understand it. Where'd the time go? In Tafshin Nun Beis was an Iber Yod, and it was before Purim. It was Chav Zayin Adar Aleph. You know that Moshe Klein was a nurse by the Rebbe. He and Yingi Rishishki took care of the Rebbe for those 2 years. And he's speaking, and he's relating things that happened. Yesterday in the Kfar Chabad, they had something which I've never seen before. And I am sorry, I'm going to be remiss because I don't have it in front of me. But the stroke was on a Monday. I think it was Shabbos. A few days later, a few days after the stroke, the Rebbe wanted to say something to Moshe Klein. And he had a very difficult time. They eventually figured out methods of understanding what the Rebbe was trying to say. And he tried to get words. Rebbe should choose words and then they'll construct a sentence. It took him a very, very long time. And the Rebbe was very precise in the language. But the teichen of what the Rebbe wanted to say was that a Rav zol paskinen, a Rav should paskin, that I should have a refuah shlema. And he said things like, just like until now, the Rebbe said, I had such good health, I should continue having such good health. And he used a number of expressions that I don't remember. One of the expressions was oishev, ashiris, oishev. And it should be, and if it's going to be for me, it shouldn't only be for me, it should be for Hasidim as well. This is the teichen of this tefillah. The truth is, I'll probably go home today, take out the Kfar Chabad, copy it, and bring it back tomorrow and read it to you precise, whatever, the next time we learn. But it's very interesting that the Rebbe said this. I don't understand why this was not the Pirso, which is a chera, shtikol tzarechiyah. What's the reason it's a secret? I heard from Dr. Rosen, who was also involved in the Rebbe's medical care, but this we heard b'shas ma'aseh, that the Rebbe couldn't speak. And there were certain words that came out clearly. The Rebbe could say yeah, the Rebbe could say name. By the way, I want to restate that. If the Rebbe wanted to speak, he could have spoken. Whatever the cheshbon, you're talking about a Rebbe's a balabasi bezich. There's a story with the Tzemach Tzedek I always tell you. Tzemach Tzedek couldn't walk. And he sang the Alter Rebbe's niggin and took a walk. No kasha v'mais. But in Das Tachten, from a medical perspective, the Rebbe can't reden. And by the way, I heard this from Yingi Bistritsky. When they did the first scan on the Rebbe, it was late Monday night, the technician who was reading the scan, as soon as the Rebbe's brain came up, gasped. So Yingi Bistritsky says to him, what, the stroke is so bad? He says, no. He says, what's this? I've never seen a brain like this. The correct word is atrophy. The Rebbe's brain had not aged. The way the brain of a human being works is that as a person ages, it shrinks. And the brain cavity is filled with liquid, with a fluid. The Rebbe's brain was physically young. In other words, here was a situation where begashmius you saw that a Rebbe is different, not beruchnius. Push it physically. The Rebbe's heart. You ask people who were involved in the Rebbe's medical care. In his heart, in Lamed Ches, the Rebbe's heart looked like an old man's heart, an old heart. That's a brachana heart, a heart that was irregular. I don't understand all the language and so on. But the Rebbe's moyach, hagashmi, physically, was not at all explicable within the parameters of science. His brain had not aged, didn't get old. Which is the davar pele. Mamish at the davar pele, tepach hateva. But this we heard b'shas ma'aseh. This we heard then. And the other thing we heard then, which Dr. Rosen later repeated, that two of the words that the Rebbe said clearly, repeatedly, was shira v'zimra. Shira v'zimra. Shira v'zimra. These words came out clearly. Mullah Butman got up over here and he said that the Rebbe said, Zadayin Arafu Shleima Berev Shira V'Zimra. It'll have a full recovery, Berev Shira V'Zimra. You have such a hard time knowing what happened and what didn't happen, what's embellished and what's not embellished. My tendency is that the things that we heard then are more likely to be true than the things that we're hearing now that we didn't know from then, unless it's in a Yuman, it's in a journal. If someone wrote it down then, so it's not a memory of 20 years ago, it's from 20 years ago. I'm very, very skeptical of hearing stories today that happened during that period, unless we heard them b'shatz mais. But the Rebbe spoke about Shira V'Zimra, Lein Freilich. Was kann ich euch sagen? Chazayin Oder, yeah, what can I sagen? I remember that Chazayin Oder, the reactions of Chassidim were various, but certainly it was a huge faction that the response to Chazayin Oder would be dancing and singing in 770. If you can recall that Oder, if you can remember that month, the Rebbe, Tavshin and Beis was a freiliche year. Tavshin and Beis was a very happy year. It was very, very positive. As soon as Adar started, the mood by the Rebbe was different. First of all, the Rebbe spoke almost every day. The Rebbe spoke almost every single day a Sikha. Almost every day a Sikha. And in hindsight, you ask yourself, where was your head? Where were we? But it was so clear that the Rebbe was totally in charge of what's going on. You probably know that the Rebbe cleaned his room out during the preceding winter. The Rebbe cleaned his room. Every piece of paper that did not belong in his room was sent out. Either it was sent to the person that it belonged to, or it was burnt, or it was brought to the Eihel. Every sefer in the Rebbe's room that the Rebbe had in his room, sometimes for decades, was sent to the Rebbe's library. On the day of the stroke, the only thing on the Rebbe's table was the Sefer HaShluchim. The Rebbe put it there, which is remarkable. The whole winter, the Rebbe was cleaning his room. But the Rebbe had a stroke. The Rebbe's room was spotless clean. He took out every sefer. The Rebbe had a lot of svarim in his room, but the svarim that the Rebbe had in these piles, these famous piles, the Rebbe's room was piled with svarim. Who would take a on the piles of svarim? When the Rebbe used to make yechidas, he used to just cover the svarim with paper. Everything was put where it's supposed to be. When the Rebbe Poshet cleaned his room spotless, there was not any. In other words, there was nothing left that was not B'kavona left. The Rebbe Poshet cleaned everything out of his room, cleaned everything out. This was a fact. This is a fact. And doesn't make Yizok Teichet Yemel. As soon as others started, the mood by the Rebbe was different. The Rebbe's mood was very different. And when Mrs. Lapine was killed, it was Gorgefelach. But the language of the Rebbe, the things the Rebbe said again and again and again, there were two things. Number one, the Rebbe kept on saying, Guf body, Neshama bria b'guf body, a healthy soul and a healthy body. Noch hanan gesagt. And the other thing was, the Rebbe was speaking about bottle b'shishim. There were two others, which is 60 days. So the Rebbe took a bottle to mevatel any in leitev. And the Rebbe spoke noch hanan ben simcha. So at that time, every day we danced. Before the stroke, every day in 770 there was dancing. So after the stroke, and especially since we heard this message, right away, I think it was even Monday, that the Berev Shira V'Zimra, we danced in 770. Frem, the Yidden came in and said, Mishaguim, what are they doing? And his friend tells him, Nay, Nish Mishagoyim, Chsidim. Anyway, what can I tell you about Chazayin Oder? I don't know what to say. I'm repeating events, I'm repeating stories, I'm repeating what happened. What to make of it? We need the Gula. What can I say? The Rebbe spoke 2 years earlier, or a year earlier, that Chazayin Oder is the Infant Shem Elikim. Chav Vav, he spoke about Oder. Chav Vav is Shem Havayeh. Chav Zayin is to be Magal the Lakus of Choshech, of Helen. So it should be now, because we can't go on like this. We can't go on like this. Okay, everybody agrees. I was on a mask. Yeah. Now we're learning Tanya, and we're at Daf Hey Amud Beis. That means the second side of the first page of the Tanya itself, and we're in effect ready to begin what we are calling the Tanya. In other words, we've had so far 3 classes, and in these 3 classes we read 2/3 of a Perek, right? We had the whole of Daf Hey Amud Aleph and 2/3 of Hey Amud Beis. Now we're holding by the 2 dots on Daf Hey Amud Beis. What did we learn, or more precisely, how did we learn it? We learned the Tanya in the following way. This is how I taught it to you. And I taught it to you to say because I think this was the Alter Rebbe's intention. The Alter Rebbe didn't want to start the Tanya with Zayah. With Zohar, with Kabbalah, with Nimis HaTev. In other words, you could make a case that the Tanya shouldn't begin Tanya b'Seif Perek Gimel Denida. The Tanya should begin Isa v'Rayim Mehem ne Pashas Mishpatim. The Tanya should start. It says in Rayim Mehem ne Pashas Mishpatim. It says in Zayah in Rayim Mehem ne Pashas Mishpatim. What's a tzaddik and what's a beinani and what's a tzaddik and Rasha. Tzaddik Yetzatev Sheftan, Rishoim Yetzatev Sheftan, and Beinim Zevazeh Sheftan. And last week I actually brought in physically the Raya Mehemne, and we read a piece of it inside. And again, the class is online and the PDF is online also. Because the Tanya is based on this Raya Mehemne. The whole sheet of the Tanya about what is a tzaddik and what is a Beinani, what is a Rosh is based on Raya Mehemne. The Alter Rebbe Dafke started with Gemara. And he shows you contradictions in the Gemara itself. And he concludes, he paskins, to use a word that the Rebbe would use about the Tanya often, that in the Gemara there's two criteria for the words tzaddik and beinani rosh. One is a shem hamushal, a borrowed allusion, and the other is a shem hatel, which means a precise and a descriptive allusion. The borrowed allusion is al shem hadin, when a person is judged. So if they're majority good, they're tzaddik. If they're majority evil, they're rasha. If they're 50-50 approximately, they're beinani. And in standard Chazal, and this is how it is in Rambam also in Hilchos Tshuva, tzaddik is reiv toiv, rasha is reiv ra, and so forth. Because it's a shem hamushal, lefisha nidun acharu. Those are the words of the Alter Rebbe. It's a borrowed allusion because the person is judged by the majority. But the Alter Rebbe says in the Gemara itself, particularly the Gemara in Brachas, and the conclusion where Rabbi says, "Again, I know a beinani. I am a beinani." And Abaye answers his Rebbe and says, "If you're a beinani," and the Rabbi was the Nasi Ador, Rabbi was called Rabbi. Rabbi means the Groise Rebbe. That's what Rabbi means. Rab Ze'era means the Kleine Rebbe, and Rabbi means the Groise Rebbe. It's a touch of the word. The Rebbe spoke about this in the Sicha. Put him. Kam Rabbi v'shachla Rab Ze'era. Yes, so Rabbi was Grois, Rabbi Bar Nachmani. He was the Rebbe of Abaye. And Abaye tells him, if you're a beinani, then there's no tzaddikim in the world. How could the world exist? So the Alter Rebbe, of course, concludes that Rabbi made a mistake. But a mistake is not a tipshes. A mistake has to be a reasonable mistake. It has to be a mistake within reason. So the Alter Rebbe explains, how was it a mistake within reason? Because a beinani ein bei afilu oven bittul teira. A beinani does not even have a vein bittul teira, the sin of bittul teira, which is something which the Chazal say. This place is brought in Tanya. Person is nichshal b'chol yom and gimel dvarim, and in Tanya it says one of them is bittul teira. And v'noida that Rabbi lay posik pumim megis. Rabbi never stopped learning for a min. Malach HaMavis loy hoyochal lishter. This is a Gemara that the Malach HaMavis wanted to kill Rabbi. He couldn't touch him. Why? Because he was never stopping to learn Torah. So the mistake that Rabbi made is because a beinani has no avedis, a tzaddik has no yetzer hara, a beinani has no avedis but he has a yetzer hara, and Rabbi made the mistake of saying that he's a beinani thinking that he has taka no avedis because he's learning Torah day and night, but that he has no yetzer hara. This he didn't know, and the emes is Torah Rabbi b'yatzmi. Rabbi taka made a mistake, but the mistake makes sense. So we learned the Gemaras, and then the Alter Rebbe, in the middle of quoting these Gemaras, brings the Zayah. So the way I taught it to you, I separated it. I learned with you the Gemaras, and then last week we learned the Zayah. That the Zayah brings, it's almost the same Gemara as the Gemara in Brachas, without the Psukim. Tzadikim Yisrael Sheftan, Rishoim Yetzer Hara Sheftan, and so on. When you learned the Zayar, you had a very, very different idea about what Tzaddik V'Tevli and Tzaddik V'Rali and Rosh V'Tevli and Rosh V'Rali and Beinani are. So we did all of this. We had 3 classes on the Pnim of the Tanya, and this is what we did so far. We showed in the Gemara the 2 levels, and we moved on to the Zayar, right? And to repeat quickly, and quickly taka means quickly. Tzaddik V'Tevli in Nigla means a tzaddik who has it good materially, begashmis. But in Chassidus, tzaddik v'teiv means that his yetzer hara is also good. Tzaddik v'rale in Nigla means a tzaddik who suffers begashmis, who suffers materially. But in Zayat tzaddik v'ra means he's a tzaddik, but there's still ra inside of him. The Alter Rebbe says the lashon shara shavei kofaf l'teiv. The lashon in Zayat is meishel v'shalit. There's evil in a tzaddik v'ra, but the teiv is misgaber. In other words, the ra is in the subconscious, not on the conscious level. A tzaddik can't do an aveda. Not he doesn't do an aveda. He cannot do an aveda, but on some levels of the subconscious, there could be an inyan from heipach hatev. And the same is true Rasha. Rasha v'teiv lei al pi nigla means that Rasha who has it good physically, begashmias. And beruchni means that Rasha who still has good on the conscious levels of his being, which means to say, obviously he does mitzvahs, but moreover, malayim charatas. He has feelings of guilt and regret. He has a Jewish conscience. Rasha v'rale means, al pi nigla means that Rasha who suffers materially. And al pi pnimis hanyanim, Rasha v'rale means that Rasha whose consciousness is all evil. There's no good in him whatsoever. Meaning to say, not only he does Avedas, he has no guilt, he has no conscience, he has no sense of a moral right and a moral wrong, and of a higher madrege, v'chuli, v'chuli, v'chuli. This is like Rasha tzaddik v'teile, tzaddik v'rale, Rasha v'teile, and Rasha v'rale, nisapi pnimis ha'anyon. Now, we had a class a while ago, where I brought in the pasuk. I brought the chumash, and we learned it inside. On the pasuk ya mitzvah zeis, right? Le'nifleis v'le'rechekel le'b'shemaim le'miv. And I don't know if you remember that class. I'm not going to hold it against you. But what I taught you was that the pasuk ki karev elecha adav ha'mayed b'ficha v'avchala seisei has a context. The Tanya is based on a pasuk. The pasuk says karev elecha adav ha'mayed is very near to you, the matter, and the matter means teiru mitzvahs. B'ficha means speech. B'vavcha means thought. Seisei means actions, or however you translate this pasuk. A person could control his b'ficha b'vavcha laseis. But in that sequence, there's 4 higher levels of the neshama. There's me'evel hayam, across the sea, which goes on the midas, the emotions. There's bashamayim, there's in the sky, which goes on the moichin, the intellectual parts of the person. There's rechoika, there's far away, which goes on the ratzon of the person. And there's nefleis, which is wondrous, which goes on the tainu. Different levels of the neshama. When you talk about tzaddik, you're talking about a human being who's killed his yetzer hara as it relates to action. He won't do anything bad. He has no interest. He has no desire. He won't do anything bad. He won't say anything bad, and he won't even think anything bad. For a person to be a tzaddik, which means not he doesn't do avedas, he has no desire to avedas, he has to kill his yetzer hara. In the words of David HaMelech, he hollows out his heart. But in order to be a tzaddik on the level of beficha b'vavcha seisei, he only has to kill that level of the yetzer hara, which is connected to action, which is the chitzonius hamidas. The lowest level of human emotion motivates what we think and speak and do. If you can kill the yetzer hara on the lowest level of human emotion, you have no desire for aveda. But you're still a tzaddik v'rale. Why? Because there's many levels of the neshama higher than that. There's the inner dimension of the emotions, there's the mind, there's the will, there's the pleasure, and so on. And a tzaddik v'rale means this: he's killed his yetzer hara on a level where not only will he not do anything wrong, but he has no desire to do anything wrong, but he hasn't killed his yetzer hara on the levels higher than this. And for this you have to have sigufim and tanyas. The avodah tzaddikim is a whole other universe, the world of a tzaddik. But there's madreges. In other words, you can have a tzaddik v'rale who still has ra on the level of his midas. Alachas kama v'kama on the level of his mind and his will and his pleasure. Then you can have a tzaddik v'rale who's higher. He's killed the yetzer hara on the level of emotions, but he still has ra on the level of his intellect. And alachas kama v'kama on the higher level. So there's different madreges in tzaddik. To you and me, it's all the same. A person who has no yetzer hara, has no desire to do avedas, is a holy person, is an inspired person. The idea that there should be such disparateness, and then above all of that, the tzaddik v'teiv lei, who's killed his yetzer hara so completely that the yetzer hara has been turned around and been made into another yetzer teiv. There's an ifshalakiyas. We have no concept of separating these in Yonim. But this is what the Alter Rebbe is teaching us here. And like I said to you earlier, this is basically from the Raya Mehemne Pashas Mishpatim. The Emes is the Gemara in Brachas, but Alter Rebbe writes in the Haggadah that the source of the Emitis Shema Teir and the Mehus Chiluk and Mehus Madreges Sadik From whose madregas beinani is a k'misha kosa, but I am a him, the pashas mishpatim, deliyel. The source of this is that I am a him. Okay? So now, we're making now an official statement, okay? We are done with Nigla. That's it, finished. Finished with the Gemara. We're learning now Tzadik Beinani Rasha Al Pi Chassidus. And we are learning a Sefer that is called Sefer Shel Beinanim. That's what it's called. The Book of Intermediates. I heard that Rabbi Chaim Miller named it the In-Betweener, which is an interesting alternative to intermediate. And in a lot of ways, the word works better. The word says that it brings out the point. In between means men reingeltzach, you're wrestling on both ends, is a Beinani. So we're going to learn now, we're learning a Sefer Shel Beinanim, and the Tag Sefer Shel Beinanim, that the Alter Rebbe is writing a Sefer to teach a person how to do it, B'Peil. It's not a philosophy book, it's not a mystical book, it's a Sefer of Musar, as the Alter Rebbe calls it. It's a Sefer of Eirah and Avodah, but it is Musar that you say Baharei Kedesh, Medrash Chazal. It's Musar, which is also Torah, it's based on Ruach HaKodesh and so on, to teach a person how being a Beinani is possible and realistic, and the Alter Rebbe is providing practical instruction what a person should do in order to achieve the Madrega of Beinani. That's what Sefer Shel Beinanim is about. The Sefer Shel Beinanim, L'Kutei Amorim, Sefer Shel Beinanim exists for the simple purpose of teaching a person how to be a Beinani. Okay, so let's begin. Let's start. Ach biyur ha'inyan. The explanation is as follows. But at Alpi Mashakosa for Rabbi Chaim Vital Zal, it's based on the Sefer written by Rabbi Chaim Vital, which is called Shara Kedusha. Shara Kedusha is not part of the Shmeina Sha'ar. This is a separate Sefer from the Rachav, which speaks about the Yom of Kedusha. There's other Svarim from the Rachav besides. But this is one of the Svarim that Rachav wrote, like a Sefer of Musar, that's separate from the direct Kabbalah that Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote, the Shmeina Sha'arim and so on. And in this Sefer Shara Kedusha, and in the brackets it says, Beitz Chaim Shanun Perik Beis, it also says in Eitz Chaim, as follows. 10, after the two dots. And remember, we're learning now only Pnimius HaTeira, there's no more Gemara. The L'Kol Ish Yisrael, every single man of Israel, that means every man and woman of course, Echad Tzadik ve'Echad Rasha, whether one is a Tzadik or one is a Rasha, including a Tzadik Gomor and a Rasha Gomor, Yesh Shtei Neshamas, there's two souls, two Neshamas. But then, by a Tzadik Gomor, the Yetzatev and the Nefesh HaBahamis became a Yetzatev. The Yetzirah, Nefesh HaBahamis became a Yetzatev and the Nefesh HaLekis. But it's two souls. And the same is true to the opposite extreme. By a Rasha, every Yid, Echad Tzadik, Echad Rasha, even a perfect Tzadik, and even a perfect Rasha, has two Neshames. Ukediksiv, it says in the Pasuk, Uneshames Ani Asisi, I created Neshames. And then the Alter Rebbe says, Shei Shtei Nefashos. He says first the word Neshama, and the reason he says the word Neshama is because the Pasuk says the word Neshama, but as soon as he says the word Neshama, and he shows that the Pasuk says Uneshames Ani Asisi, and we interpret the words of the Neshames Ani Asisi, that every Yid is created with two Neshamas, he says, Shem Shtei Nefashos, the two Nefashos. Now, I don't want to give you long speeches, but you should just know that in the world of the Rambam, the word Nefesh is higher than the word Neshama. In the world of the Rambam, the word Neshama is the life force that we share with animals. And the word Nefesh and the word Ruach is the life force which is unique to people. But Al Pi Kabbalah is the other way around. The word Neshama represents something loftier, and the word Nefesh represents something simpler. Nefesh means a life force. So every Yid has Shtei Nefashos, two souls. What are they? Let's continue to read. Nefesh Achas Mitzad HaKlipa B'Sitra Achara. The first soul comes from the side of Klipa, which means literally a peel or a shell. V'Sitra Achara, which means literally the other side. V'Hi Mislabeshes B'Dama Adam, which is manifest in the blood of the person. Right? Now let's cheat. What does it say, the first words of Perek Beis? How does Perek Beis begin? Next page. V'Nefesh Hashem is B'Yisrael. The second nefesh, the second life force which a Jew has, is chelik elakami mal mamish, is the peace of God from above. Mamish, and in Tanya Perek Test, the Alter Rebbe says that the seat, the mishkan, the place where the neshama lives, is in the mayach. Okay, so here he starts off. Here there's two nefeshes, nefesh habahamis, the end of Perek Aleph, nefesh halakis is the beginning of Perek Beis. Now I just want to say I don't know why the Alter Rebbe does this. He gives the nefesh habahamis like 15 lines. Right, the rest of this Perek is to be nefesh habahamis. In Perek Vav, he's going to go back to nefesh habahamis. Vav, Zayin, and Ches are again about nefesh habahamis. The Alter Rebbe starts off with nefesh habahamis, gives him a few lines. Perek Beis begins nefesh halakis, and then Beis, Gimel, Dalad, and Hey, 2, 3, 4, 5, discuss comprehensively in two aspects what the neshama is, and then he goes back to the nefesh habahamis again. I don't know why the Alter Rebbe does this. Why he starts with the nefesh habahamis, I understand, because it's the first one you get. The first one you get when a person is born. The first neshama you have is the Yetzer Hara, the nefesh habahamis. Like it says, Agdem et Anisei, the nefesh habahamis comes before the nefesh halakis. So then why don't you discuss them completely? Instead, he just discusses them for a few lines, moves over to the nefesh halakis, and then comes back to the nefesh habahamis and what the nefesh habahamis does much later. And I don't know, I don't have to know everything. But these are the two nefashas that a person has, a nefesh halakis and a nefesh habahamis. An animal soul and a godly soul. So we stop right here. What is the difference between the animal soul and the godly soul? And I'm going to share ideas. Obviously, in Tanya they're written b'remes, but this is how it is in Chassidus. Ois Filach, without a question. Remember the previous Rebbe. I told you the story recently. We were Bachrim, and we went to Fabring by a Shliach one night. A very, very special night. It was a very eventful night in our lives. And it was late in the night. It was a good Fabringen. It was a very serious Fabringen. From that Fabringen, there's at least two shluchim. Two of my chavedim who were all planning to be millionaires in the beginning of that night. It's a true story. A Meiser Shloya Kachoya. They're shluchim today, and they will attribute it to that Fabringen. It's a very special Fabringen. It's one of the Fabringens that all of us will never forget. It was 2 a.m, and one of his babies woke up. Mamsha infant, 3 months old. And he got out of the chair, and he went upstairs, and he picked his baby out of the cradle and brought the baby back downstairs. And he's holding the baby in his hands. And he says to us, what do you think of this baby? Now, of course, we're Bachrim. What do Bachrim do? They have to figure out what you wanted to say, and then say it, and be smart. So he let us hear what we thought we were supposed to say. So sweet and so beautiful and so innocent and so harmless and so lovable, which is all true. And then when he was finished giving us the whole list of things that we thought we were supposed to say, he says, you know what this baby is? This baby is ich. I. All this baby is concerned with, ich will essen, ich will schlafen, and there's a couple other ichs in addition. Yeah, I want to eat, I want to sleep. A baby wants something in Christ. That's the whole story. Simple. Because as Taka is beautiful and as charming and as attractive as a baby is, of course a baby is also helpless. But a baby is a symptom of what a behemoth is. It thinks about itself. Now, let's talk about an animal. Yeah? Are animals bad? Is the Nefesh HaBahamis bad? And the truth of the matter is, you could even say, is Klipa bad? And the ultimate answer is, of course, klipa is bad, but it has to do with how you define the word. As you'll see in Tanya, the definition of klipa is not exactly the same as the one that we're familiar with and that we're used to, and that we use all the time. Let's talk about an animal. Yeah. Has a cow ever bothered anybody? Has a goat ever bothered? If you bother a cow, he may bother you back. Yeah, and the cow's big and strong, so it's not a good idea to start up with him. All he wants to do is eat grass. Leave me alone. Eat grass and drink water. That's it. Loves me to do. And the same is true of a goat and a sheep. Any animal you want, they just want to be left alone. Because the definition of bad in Pnimiyas HaTorah is quite different than the definition of bad, as you understand it in Nigel Torah. I'm going to talk about this in subsequent weeks. In the next few classes, we're going to be going through all of these terms. Nefesh HaLekis and Nefesh HaBahamis, Klipa and Kedusha, Klipas Noig and Shol, Klipas HaBez. I'm going to give you a whole series of classes on these subjects. Now, in the beginning of the Tanya, and you'll see how these things emerge. But a behema has 3 criteria. A behema has 3 rules. Now, in the case of an animal, not all of these rules apply, but in the case of the human animal, they apply. Number 1, A behema is only concerned with itself. It's a selfish creature. It wants what it needs. It needs food, it needs water, it needs shelter, it needs to reproduce, it needs to stay alive. Simple. The center of an animal is itself. An animal needs selfish. His entire definition of existence is what it needs for itself. Number two, a behema has no vision. A behema has no vision means a behema cannot see, in the Lashon HaMishnah, malamaylo, malamata, malafon, malachir, where it came from and where it's going. Animals have no concept of purpose. There's no purpose. And there's certainly no idea of transcendence. An animal exists for what it is, and that's enough. The idea that they come from the Yebishter, which is before the universe, and the idea that they're supposed to be given back to the Yebishter, which is after the universe, the idea of outside and what is beyond its reality, animals have no such concept. When I was a Bach in Yeshiva, I once heard a mashal from one of the Elder Bach who has a very big impact on my life, with the mashal with the giraffe and the goat. I'm giving this mashal many times. Listen. The giraffe walks with his head up, and the goat walks with his head down, and the giraffe is trying to explain to the goat how beautiful the world is. And the goat says, all I see is grass. So the giraffe says, raise your head and you'll see a beautiful world. So the goat breaks its neck and raises its head and sees clouds and a blue sky and a mountain and trees and grass and water cascading from the hills into the valley and collecting in a pond and then radiating outward and becoming little streams and then gathering in a river and so on. It's beautiful. Eibishter's Welt. And the goat looks around and says, so where is all the wonderful things that you're telling me? He says, look around, look what you see. So the goat says very simply, I can't eat it. I can't eat the sky, I can't eat the clouds, so what do I need it for? That's an animal. If I can eat it, it serves my purposes. In other words, if it speaks to the animal on the animal level, which is a basic selfishness, then it serves the purpose. If it doesn't speak to the animal on the animal level, the animal pushes it. He has no use for it. So this is the second idea, right? The first idea of the animal is that he's a selfish creature. The second idea of an animal is that he has no concept of transcendence. In other words, not he doesn't know what's beyond. If you would teach him what's beyond, he would say simply, I can't eat it. And now you have a third characteristic. And this third characteristic requires intelligence. Not all animals have this because they're simply not smart enough. And that is fear. An animal is constantly worried, always afraid. He's worried. He's worried because he feels constantly and perpetually insecure. He has no concept, what we call in our culture, betachan, there's someone watching him. So he's worried. You have animals who don't worry because they're too simple to worry. But forget, the higher, the more sophisticated an animal is, the more they have a concept of fear. And they have no concept of somebody protecting them. And perhaps not only they have no concept, it's takazei fanarasha gemara. Yeah. That for an animal to hurt a person is more difficult than for an animal to hurt another animal. That's why by hurting a person it says ki yigach, and by hurting an animal it says ki yigoif, which is considered a lesser focused act of aggression. Why? Adam islay mazle, behema leslay maza. A person is being guarded. An animal doesn't have that. So this is the third characteristic of the animal soul, that he's perpetually worried. He's always concerned. What's going to be? Someone's going to try to eat me, and so on. The Rebbe said once in a Fabreng, I heard the tape, where the Rebbe quoted Hirschel the Rav Zazun. That's what the Rebbe said. One of the sons of the Radatz said a word that the Radatz was a very, very big chassid, and his children were also great chassidim. The Mendel Chena Yadua, and the andere men of Avram Chena given. The great Menschen, sehr great Menschen. And one of them said that the Nachash was cursed. The serpent, the snake was cursed. What was the curse that the Eibishter gave the Nachash? That he should eat earth. Your whole life you should eat sand. So he asked Akasha, that's a curse? What could be greater blessing than that? Wherever you go, you have enough food. There's plenty of food. And the Teretz is, the Nachash is concerned, was wird treffen, als wird aufessen dem ganzen Erdkugel. What's he going to do if he eats up the whole globe? He eats everything up. There won't be anything left. Now, of course, The idea that a snake is going to eat up all the earth and have nothing else to eat is mental illness. It's rooted in a complete lack of sense of reality. And that's the third characteristic of the Nefesh HaBahamis. The first characteristic of the Nefesh HaBahamis is he's self-centered, his reality is centered around self. The second characteristic of the Nefesh HaBahamis is that he has no concept of what is beyond, there's no concept of transcendence, and you should know when you learn it and see this idea, this second concept. The way they explain it is as follows. The Nefesh HaBahamis can be brilliant. A person can have a seichel of his Nefesh HaBahamis, which is very intelligent. And you could learn with him Gemara, and you could learn with him Chassidus, and you could learn with him Musar, and you could understand it. But it doesn't work for him. You know, people, sometimes you learn something and you say, you know, I like this. Sometimes you learn something else and you say, this I don't like, this works for me, and this doesn't work for me. When you teach a behema, Chochmas Adam, when you teach an animal the wisdom of man, which is what? From where have I come and to where am I going? In other words, that I have a higher purpose. Right? On the one hand, we say, B'shvili nivra ha'olam, the whole world was created for me. And in the same breath, you finish off, Ani nivreisi l'shamish es koini, I was created to serve my Maker, or as the Rebbe would bring the second girsa, Ani loy nivreisi ela l'shamish es koini, I was created for no reason other than to serve my Maker, like it says in the Sichas and Chazal, Ein v'shochat elo moshach. The Eibishter created everything to be raised up. The mineral has to be raised up into the plant has to be raised up into the animal has to be raised up into the person, and the person has to be raised up into Lakus. This is the purpose. To have a chush in this, in other words, not just to learn it and understand it, but to be moved by this kind of limud, you have to have a Eidel Nefesh. The Nefesh HaBahamis can understand it. The Nefesh HaBahamis can teach it. The Nefesh HaBahamis can't relate to it. It doesn't interest him. The Nefesh HaBahamis wants to understand, this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe says, the Nefesh HaBahamis, what the world is. He has no interest in understanding where the world came from. And it's not because he denies that the world came from any place. It's not because he thinks the world is a kadma, the world always existed. But because it's not his field. I'm interested. You're talking about the idea that the world came from someplace. He says maybe. Are you interested in knowing who made it and why he made it? I'm sure he had his reasons. That's not my field. My field is what he made, not why he made it. This is the behemoth. And this is the second characteristic of the animal, that things that are transcendent don't appeal to him. First of all, he doesn't understand them and he doesn't know them. Even if he does know them and he does understand them, they don't work for him. They don't push his buttons. They don't arouse him. They don't awaken in him an interest, because he's a behemoth. And behemoths want to be able to eat it. The fact that it's beautiful, but it's miles from here, doesn't work for me. I have to be able to eat it. And the third characteristic of the Nefesh HaBahamis, and this is of course primarily in the animal soul of a person, of a Ben Adam, as opposed to the animal soul of an animal, the third characteristic is that he's always worried. He has no trust. Why is he always worried? Why does he have no trust? Because as far as he's concerned, there is nobody to trust. What about the Nefesh HaLekis, the godly soul? The godly soul is those three characteristics that I just said the other way. Number one, the godly soul center is God, not itself. The godly soul is fundamentally, is axiomatically, is basically on its core level selfless. It exists for what's outside of it. It exists for something which is bigger than it. It exists for a purpose, for the Eibishter. So there's a selflessness about it. Number two, he has enormous vision. He always wants to know where he's coming from and where he's going. He wants to understand not what he is, but why he is, which is, of course, a much, much more important question. Emes Negeya, he cares, malamaylo, malamata, malafonamach, his neshama, his chush, his tendency, his personality, his leaning is that he needs to know why. Why do I exist? From where did I come and where am I going and what is my purpose? In other words, he always wants to see the sky. Grass is very important and water is very important, but it's only grass and water. What his purpose is far more meaningful and far more important. And this is what the godly soul is concerned with. Where do I come? What's my purpose? From wann bin ich? And the last characteristic of the godly soul, this is very interesting, is Yisrael B'tach V'Havaya. The godly soul is not afraid. He doesn't live his life on the defensive. He's not a survivor. He's a liver. He's not afraid. And the reason is because he leans on God. He has trust that somebody's holding him. Right? The earth is floating through empty space. It's just wafting around in nothingness. Now, of course, the scientists will talk to you about gravity and the sun and blah, 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 blah. But the bottom line is, this earth is swimming through emptiness. But there's a toilet, the Eibush to put it there. And the Eibush to put it there because Eibush has a purpose. And the same Eibush who put it there, keeps it there. And the same Eibush who created it, preserves it, and makes sure that it gets to its purpose. That's the B'tachon. The godly soul trusts because it has a sense of purpose and a sense of connection to what's outside, what's beyond the physical, beyond the universe, and he trusts, he leans on it. He's shoyen, he leans on it. Mishon or Miftach Tzadikim. Allah Tzadikim is a bracha and shmanesre that gets nobody. It's a hard bracha to know what it is. Of all the 90 brachas of shmanesre, you look through them. Every bracha, you know exactly what it's about. Mishon or Miftach Tzadikim. Mishon means a leaning post. And Miftach means a fortress, la tzadikim. There's a bracha in Shmoneh ala tzadikim, yeah? So you first you say ala tzadikim, and then you say ala chasidim, and then you say v'al zikne amcha beis Yisrael, v'al she'eris. Play the same, I forgot the siddur, I don't have a siddur in front of me. Every year the she'eris are played, to all of us are included in the bracha of ala tzadikim, and we finish with the words mishon. Mishon means we lean on him like you lean on a stender. Miftach, and a fortress and a protection. The Eibush is a fortress. The Eibush la tzadikim. So every year the Eibush protects us. The godly soul has trust. And this is the basic difference between the animal soul and the godly soul. The animal soul centers itself. The animal soul is interested in the here and now, not in the before and the after. And the animal soul is worried and afraid and living a life of defense. Preservation of self. Yeah. The godly soul, say it. The godly soul, its center is not itself, but the Eibishter, God. It is very interested in where it's coming from and where it's going to, and it doesn't live a defensive life. It lives. It lives, doesn't survive. It lives. It thrives because it's leaning and it's being held up. Taylor edits al belima. The Eibishter halted. The Eibishter is holding her up, and that's what it lives on. I'm going to finish with this word. This is not my style. It's not my style at all, but I'm going to say it anyway. Lubavitch is like all communities of our type. We live in a black and white world. When something is good, it's atzmism v'sein zabaruch. And when something is bad, it's aveda zara, it's sholosh kribas meis legamri. And it's a simplicity. It's a terrible simplicity. It's cultural to Charedim to have this black and white idea of life because we don't have anything in our lives which are outside of religion. If everything in life is in religion, religion is very important. And in religion there's Teva and Ra. So one of the things which has become a big mitzvah in Lubavitch, I have to remember his name, is Viktor Frankl. Yeah? Viktor Frankl was a German Jew, a Jew from Vienna, Austria, who had a Meise Pille ploying with the Rebbe. Everybody knows the story. The story's been told 100 times already. And Rabbi Biederman, the Rebbe Shliach to Vienna, called him up on the phone. It's a true story. The whole story. In the early 50s, the Rebbe sent a non-frum woman to him to encourage him to continue his derech. And the Rebbe held that his derech in psychology is a very appropriate derech because it's a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which I have not read. The Teichen Advarim is that he was in the camps. He was in the Holocaust. And he came out of the camps with a higher opinion of man than when he went in, which is fantastic. It's remarkable. Most people came out of the camps, saw man as the most vicious and evil animal in the universe. He survived the camps. He was secular before the war. He's a German Jew. We don't understand what it means secular when we talk about Germans. It's beyond our hasaga to understand what's made frei. It's not only they don't keep mitzvahs, they have no God, they have nothing. Reason. And all of that reason gave us the Nazis, you understand? The logic. Seichel anushi, human intellect. He was not from before the Holocaust. He went into the camps and he saw survival. He saw how people kept themselves alive. And he came to the conclusion that the early ideas of modern psychology, which were that man is an animal, and it's all about survival and satisfying the pleasures and things of this sort, is not true. Because he saw that those people who lived animal lives died. And those people who had a sense of something which is transcendent, which is bigger, survived. And he watched people lose hope, descend into animalism, and die. He watched people hold on to their humanity, that means belief in something bigger and higher, and survive. So he came out of the war and said the human being, and I'm going to use now my words, has a godly dimension. And the godly dimension is living for this higher purpose. Number one, the center of your world isn't you. It's bigger than you. And number two, you're interested. It's a concern of yours to know what's my purpose. And from there comes strength. And from there comes no fear. Now, I'm not going to say this correctly, but a psychiatrist that I learned with told me the terms. I'm not going to remember them. My Zikaron is no good. But he used two expressions in English. He read Frankel's book. And he told me lotus. Huh? An internal locus of control, and an external locus of control. I'm saying it very wrong. I don't remember the English. But the toiche, the targum of these words are, if a person drew all his strength from inside of himself, he died. He died. If a person was in touch with something bigger than himself, he survived. So he came out of the war arguing that human beings fundamentally need meaning. Animals don't need meaning. Animals need to survive. To eat, drink, reproduce, and stay alive. That's all they need. A human being's need for meaning, in other words, we call it religion. And of course they look at religion from he saw religion as basic to the psyche of a person. The basic psychological makeup of a human being needs meaning. And this meaning is what we call nefesh elokis. What's nefesh elokis? I'm tapped into something before me, bigger than me. Its interests are my interests. What's a concern of his or hers is a concern of mine. And that's where I draw my strength, so that's how I survive. So he explained it in psychological language, and I just want to make it very clear. Viktor Frankl is not the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he's Viktor Frankl. Zolham Malichting Gan Eden. But the point is, the Rebbe supported Viktor Frankl doesn't mean what Viktor Frankl wrote is Hasidus. I remember in Nun Beis, Nun Gimel, so the language Professor Branaver found a book written by a scientist arguing the idea of Tchias HaMesim. It's a scientific book. It's a technical book. I mean, you read science books, they're impossible to read. Yeah. It's a different language. Yeah. So he got very excited. So he spoke at some Lubavitch event, and he said that there's a scientist today who proposes that Tchias HaMesim is not impossible. So hundreds of Lubavitcher guys went out and they bought the book. It's so predictable, Someone tells the story of Viktor Frankl getting the quote from them saving. So he heard that half of Lubavitch is reading this book of Tchias HaMesim and had a Yidden. Calm down. That a scientist wrote a book of Tchias HaMesim is not yet the Gimel Likim of the Rambam, you understand? It's the etzem inyan that he's even entertaining the idea that's a chiddush. So first of all, you're not going to understand the book. And second of all, the book is Chochmas Chitzenius, which is Metama Me'ech Valev, even if the name of the book is Resurrection. In other words, people took it as and the same Viktor Frankl is a psychiatrist. But he understood an idea which is very close to the emes, which is that it's part of the basic nature of a human being to live outside of love, an external locus of control. I think that's the correct wording. I'm going to ask my psychiatrist friend to tell me the exact lashonis. If I'll remember next week, I'll repeat them to you. But even this is the nekudas hadava. This is the point. The point is the nefesh habamis is selfish. Nefesh habahamis has no interest in what is beyond, and nefesh habahamis lives a defensive life. He's a survivor. He's afraid. The nefesh elokis is selfless. The center of itself is bigger than itself. Nefesh Elokis is very concerned about where it's going, and the Nefesh Elokis does not live a defensive live. It lives. It's secure. It's unafraid. And we'll continue with Hashem.